Okay. And I will start playing early. Two quick points, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if you've seen the China exchange with Trudeau
Yes.
and Pelosi saying she's not running again.
Yeah.
Okay, I will add those two, sir.
Well, uh, can you start because actually I was going to do a monologue on Pelosi's speech.
Okay, sir.
So maybe you want to make that number one. That
Okay, sir.
breaking news is Pelosi's, you know, farewell to policy. Farewell. And what's my take on that? Is this, should I do it this way or do it that way? Which way?
the breaking news that we're hearing regarding the Speaker in the United States, Nancy Pelosi. She's announced that she will not be running for a leadership post given what has happened in the House. How do you react to that news, sir?
This evening, with all the negatives that we know about the United States, she has given a most patriotic speech that one could ever make about a country. Even when she talked about the Capitol building as the greatest building in democracy, I could see a British Prime Minister saying the same thing about Parliament houses in London. And it then occurred to me that perhaps I'm not asking anybody else to do so, but that perhaps I should change my attitude towards Nigeria and the way I speak about Nigeria. That in spite of all the negative propensities that one could talk about Nigeria, is kind of leadership, still we must not forget that we have people like Dr. Kingsley Moghalu, people like Akinyemi, president of the African Development Bank, people like Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of WTO. We have people like she was a minister under Obasanjo, and she's still here in the country. She hasn't held any public office since then. And she was part of the Bring Our Girls Back when these Chibok girls, were abducted. Her name just skips my memory now. There are people within Nigeria who we could talk about in positive terms. We don't, that there is a tendency for us to go to Nigerians in the diaspora, the Nigerian British lady in the British cabinet, the Wale, who is the deputy Treasury Secretary in the United States, who basically are what I would call bifurcated Nigerians. Yes, but we don't need to go that far. There are also Nigerians with impeccable character who have served in government, who are still available to serve in government, and perhaps that's where our emphasis should be. because we will then be encouraging them. We will be encouraging those following after them, that in spite of the shenanigans that go on in this country, there are still men of good character that we can be proud of and that we could speak about proudly. We seem to have skipped several generations. We speak proudly of the Sardauna, Tafawa Balewa, Azikwe, Awolowo, Aminu Kano, and they do deserve to be spoken of in superlative terms. And then, we skip several generations, and then we start to lament and bemoan when the rain started to fall on Nigeria. When I listened to Nancy Pelosi, you wouldn't think that Trump happened in the United States. You wouldn't think that Nixon happened in the United States. You wouldn't think that blacks were being lynched in the United States, even as late as the 70s. You wouldn't think that there are states like Alabama, like Mississippi, and all those southern states in the United States where things are still not anything to be proud of. She spoke proudly about the things that one could praise in the United States. And that, to me, is what patriotism is all about. Not to refuse to criticize when there is need to criticize, but when the opportunity comes for patriotism, for loyalty, for praiseworthiness, yes, Obi Ezekwesili, that was the name I was trying to remember, the lady who was a cabinet member under Obasanjo. When occasions call for us where we can praise great and famous men and women in Nigeria, let us praise them. And of course, when we need to slam down hard on the kleptomaniacs, who control some of our institutions, then we will do so.
Thank you very much for that, sir. While we're talking about, maybe we should just talk about the US a little bit more, because we have had President Trump now let us know where he stands regarding re-election. One, what do you think about that, him signifying what he wants to do? And number two, are there other contenders that the Republican Party could put forward other than just Trump?
Well, I think that I'm not surprised that President Trump will declare that he will run. I don't know whether we should be a little bit kind to him, since he's supposed to be our in-law now. I saw so many Nigerians, some of whom I have held in high esteem, turn up in that wedding ceremony with Trump. And my spirits fell to think that they couldn't say, well, yes, Bolus, you are our friend. Maybe when you bring your bride back to Nigeria, maybe we will join you in welcoming her. But that for us to go all the way to the United States and turn up photo ops with Trump, which we then gleefully put on the social media, maybe it's not the right thing to do. But don't ever overestimate the propensity of Nigerian upper class for shame. They don't seem to have a sense of shame. I really was surprised at some of the people who turned up there. Anyway, I wasn't invited, so maybe that's why I'm lambasting the people who were invited and who showed up. I'm not surprised that he claimed that he was going to run in 2 years' time. You know what it reminds me of? There is that our elders, used to tell us a story about the tortoise who got dressed and decided to leave his house. And his wife started screaming. And so the villagers came around and asked her, what is it? He said, well, it's my husband. He's got dressed. He said he's going away. I don't know when he will come back. And the villagers then asked the tortoise, when are you going to come back? He said, not until when I am disgraced. And that, to me, describes Donald Trump. You will have thought he would have learned a lesson from these midterm elections, where most of those that he backed, sponsored, embraced, promoted, lost the election. But no, in fact, he said, those that I supported who won, I take credit for it. Those that I supported who lost, well, that's their fault. So in a way, I'm not surprised. I think there are going to be several candidates within the Republican Party who are going to aspire to run, to compete with him. One is the governor of Florida. The other is the governor of Arizona, who just completed his term and who actually has just returned from a trip to Iowa to test the waters. Unlike most commentators, I don't think that the governor of Florida has a recognition or an acceptability outside Florida. You see, Florida is a unique and special electoral body in the United States. Recall in the 60s, when Fidel Castro took over and expelled the mafia and their Cuban supporters, they went and settled in Florida. During the Bay of Pigs invasion, when President John F. Kennedy refused to send the American Air Force and American troops to join the Cuban liberation movement to invade Cuba. Those Cubans never forgave Kennedy or forgave the Democratic Party. Their generations are in Florida. They are so right-wing that if they move any few steps further, they will fall into the ocean. Those are the supporters of Dos Santos in governor of Florida. That is not going to activate any support outside that belt. I don't see him being welcomed in New York, in Michigan, in Arizona, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, even Iowa. I don't see him. Definitely not in California. So I think his popularity is just within that localized area of Florida. But look, 2 years is a long time in politics. We will start to see people who, because don't forget, whoever heard of Trump, until he stepped out that he was going to compete on the Republican Party, and whoever gave him a chance. So there are others who will step out as the dust settles from these midterm elections. But I don't think that Trump has any marketability value for the elections in 2024.
There was one thing that you have raised and again on the program every time we talked about the war in Russia and between Russia and Ukraine. You always said what concerns you was when mistakes happen. And we've got a situation now where a missile has landed in Poland and killed some Polish citizens there. That has thrown up quite a lot of issues and concerns for people. Firstly, sir, how do you react to that situation? And secondly, if this was found to have come from Russia, how should NATO respond?
Well, I was alarmed when the news first broke, because as you've rightly said in your intro, I've always said that neither Biden nor Putin will be mad enough to start a third world war. But that accidents happen. And it is this accident that scares me. So when I heard that this missiles had landed in Poland, there are several options we could play with. One, that the missiles came from Russia. Two, and that it was deliberate. Two, that it came from Russia, but it was an accident, missiles going astray. Thirdly, that it came from Russia from elements within the military establishment in Russia who think that Putin is leading Russia down the slope of ruin. And therefore, they may want to precipitate something that will activate NATO's reaction and put a stop to what Putin is doing before what happened under Hitler to Germany happened. Number 4, it could be from Ukraine, who still have in their armory Russian-made missiles and Russian-made military equipment that also might have gone astray, or that maybe deliberately were put into operation. Because as I have said, Ukraine is being bombed into oblivion, and who knows what those at the top of the strategic and military elite in Ukraine might have come to a conclusion about what do we have to lose. We are losing everything in any case. Therefore, we might as well precipitate. So it's, but fortunately, apart from Ukraine itself, the rest of the world seems to have come to the conclusion that the missiles came from Ukraine, but that it was not deliberate, that it was an attempt to shoot down incoming Russian missiles, that these Ukrainian missiles went astray. Ukraine has not admitted that, but the rest of the world has. And so we could then all heave a sigh of relief that we are not going to have the beginning of a third world war on our hands. You've asked, supposing for the purpose of intellectual discussion, that actually the rockets, the missiles came from Russia. Well, there are 2 articles in the NATO Charter that will be activated. Article 4, which calls for consultation, which will have called for a meeting of NATO ministers of defense, ministers of foreign affairs, and then, depending on their findings, Article 5 will be activated, which is that an attack on one is an attack on all. And the United States, France, Great Britain will have been obliged to hit, to at least take some measures targeting Russia. Even now that, as I said, there's a consensus that the missiles came from Ukraine, I will still advocate a limited response. And what would this response be? It will be defensive in nature. Although in war these days, what is defensive and what is offensive, could become a matter of argument. But what I will advocate will be that NATO should put a defensive shield, aerial defensive shield, on all that part of Ukraine that shares the same border with NATO countries, and declare them a no-flying zone for Russian aircraft or Russian missiles. So this kind of an accident will not take place. If missiles are not flying into that, a defensive area zone, then possibility of them going across into either Estonia or Moldova or Poland again will not happen. Because don't forget, it seems so many things have happened since this war started that it's possible for us to forget certain things. But about 4 months ago, the United States, under NATO umbrella, decided to establish more bases for its operational troops from where they were before this war started, which means that the possibility of American military base being hit by a missile that's gone astray is higher now than it was when this war started. But if NATO can establish this air drone over that part of Ukraine that at jaws that are bought boundaries with NATO countries, then we will have at least put in place measures to prevent accidents happening.
Thank you, sir. Let me pick up one other point about Russia on this, sir. No, actually, before that, sir, from the Polish government perspective, should they wait for NATO, or what should their response be, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Russia? What should their response be, sir?
No, it makes a difference. If it is Russia, then, as I said, you are going to activate Article 4 and Article 5. If it is from Ukraine, and the Secretary General of NATO has said, we are not blaming Ukraine for this, even though the missiles came from Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to defend itself. So, in a way, the blame is still on the person who fired the missiles that Ukraine is defending itself against. So that's put the matter to rest. Apologies will be made, and I think that Ukraine is wrong. It's been wrong in this way, where it continues to deny what even its own allies are saying you did it, but we don't blame you. That seems to me to be a good face-saving measure for Ukraine, and Zelensky should simply stop being stubborn and accept that and apologize. A mistake has happened, an accident has happened, we didn't mean it. We were being attacked and we were trying to defend ourselves, which is what NATO has put forward. Zelensky should simply accept that. And maybe NATO will help Poland to, make reparations to the families of the people that got killed, and repair of the farms and the equipment that had got damaged. But until this happened, we were not really aware, although those of us in the field had always suspected that there were back channels between the United States and Russia going on. Now we know that last week, the director of the CIA and his counterpart in Russia actually met in Turkey to talk about whatever it is they talked about. Two, we now know also that Russia has indicated to the United States that they are interested in the resumption of the strategic arms reduction talks, so that again they could start talking about the next phase of reduction in missile production, in intercontinental ballistic missile reduction, to a level that neither side will feel threatened. That, maybe just that, light at the end of the tunnel that may indicate a reduction in the mind as regards hostility between the two countries.
But, sir, we've seen Russia gradually, it seems anyway, almost taking these steps towards a peaceful resolution of what's going on, sir. So if we look at one, the pullout from Kherson, we look at number two, the fact that, as you say, they want to renegotiate this treaty. Is this them looking for that soft landing and a way of ending this war while trying to save their face, sir?
When you are playing chess, often it's not the pawn that you moved that is significant. Your opponent will look for what lines you are opening up for you to move maybe the bishop or move the castle by using your pawn or sacrificing your pawn. So all these movements may indicate, I'm not saying indicates, may indicate together may indicate positive moves. But as of itself, Kherson was becoming untenable, and they were not prepared to sacrifice more troops. So they moved their troops to a more defensible position on the east bank of the river. But the destruction that they left behind, to me, does not indicate a state of mind of peaceful disposition. It's evil what Russia did to Ukraine. And that's why I said Ukraine is being destroyed into oblivion. What is going to take to repair and rebuild Ukraine is going to take decades. I know there was a resolution passed at the United Nations General Assembly. I think it was 94 votes against 14, with 74 abstentions, that Russia is going to be held responsible for reparation and rehabilitation and reconstruction of Ukraine. But of course, that resolution has no legal value, and Russia could afford to simply brush it off just like the United States, year in, year out, continues to brush off United Nations General Assembly resolution condemning American action against Cuba, sanctions against Cuba, blockade of Cuba. For almost the past 15 years, the UN has been passing a resolution calling for America to stop it. And the United States has simply ignored it. Russia will also ignore this. But at least it shows you where global public opinion is. That is of probative value, because if at the end of all of this, Ukraine decides to take Russia to the International Court of Justice, all these resolutions that have piled up at the UN will be put into evidence against Russia and what the world feels about Russia.
So let me take you to Kenya, sir. It's not even 6 months now since Kenya elected their new president. But there was a comment this week that has been surprising to many. One, President Ruto said to legislators not to remove presidential term limits from the country's constitution. And this was responding to a legislator that had asked for that to happen if the leader happens to be a capable leader. So the question to you, sir, is what is your view on removing such term limits because the leader is capable?
How does this member of parliament know that they have a capable leader on their hands? As you rightly said in your intro, these elections took place only about 3 months ago. And now you've jumped to a conclusion that you've got a good chap on your hands. That MP just wants to stir up troubled waters. I think, I'm not sure that we should be really categorical about these term limits, because I'm not persuaded that term limits and development in a global South country are compatible. Term limit, the usual ones is 4 years, 4 years, maximum 8 years. 8 years. Are those really sufficient for you to come into office, plan, start, after planning, you call for, what is it, when you want to award a contract, you call for companies to express an interest, and then you call for them to put in bids, and then you examine the bids. Depending on which country you are, you may send it to the Bureau of Public, where they check whether that contract is padded or not, before you then award the contract, before they then mobilize to site, and then they start. I put it to you that by that time, 4 years are gone. And then the remaining 4 years, what happens? I recall a particular situation where a regime put in place import substitution program. And the indigenous industrialists mobilized and started, building of industries, building of factories. And I said to a prominent member of that government, you are going to live in 3 years' time. And yet these local industrialists are just mobilizing and investing. What is your guarantee that the next regime that is going to come will continue your industrial policies? Oh, he said, well, we've promised we are going. Lo and behold, they left after 3 years, they held elections. The next regime that came started dashing out import licenses that allow people to bring in goods that the new factories had not even started to produce. And so what happened? That was an end of industrialization in that country. And instead, goods from India, from China, from England, from all over the place were now flooding the market. And that destroyed the industrialization project that was put in place by a previous regime. So really, when you look at the successful examples of industrialization, the most famous being Singapore, from third world to first world. Lee Kuan Yew was in power for 30-something years. And I put it to you, I hold forth that he succeeded in Singapore because he didn't have to worry about term limitation and about whether the next incoming government will reverse the policies that he had put in place. So in my own mind, of course, people could argue that if you've got a kleptomaniac, a corrupt regime in your hand, you want term limitation. You want to get rid of him and hopefully get a better government in your hand. But if you've got a good government with vision, with focus, with energy, clean, honest on your hand, and it's got to be confronted with this term limitation, well, tough luck. So I don't think I'll go out and bat for term limitation under any condition.
Wow. Thank you, sir. There's a question here, sir. This person says, how come that since 1945 till date, the United Nations or United Nations Security Council has no mechanism to address this kind of disproportionate war when it is obvious it was an act of aggression by a superpower involved and not the other way around?
Because the pillars for stability and peace post-Second World War was built on the superpowers or the global powers will not go to war against each other. And therefore, each one of them was given the power of veto in the Security Council. Because without that power of veto, nothing would have prevented the Security Council from voting for, say, the United States to go to war against the Soviet Union because of something the Soviet Union did somewhere, or for the Soviet Union to go to war against the United States for what is done in Korea, or for China to go to war against the United States. And that will destroy the foundation on which the world order of the Second World War was. The post-World War, the world order was built on the superpowers not going to war against themselves. You know, nobody thought, they couldn't possibly conceive that there will be a war in Europe. What's going on in Europe between Russia and Ukraine is actually a tribal war. It's actually a tribal war. Now, tribal wars have been going on in Asia, in Africa, during the post-World War II period. And they were allowed to happen because they just didn't have that capacity to blow up into something bigger than a local war. And that's why you will recall when the Soviet Union invaded Hungary, Czechoslovakia, to put down freedom fighters there, the West didn't go to the support of those liberation fighters. Also, when the United States invaded several countries in South America, the Soviet Union didn't go to the support of those countries. And the only time when the Soviet Union tried to change the equation in Cuba, Kennedy was prepared to go to war, and the Soviet Union had to pull back from Cuba. So this is an unexpected war in the heart of Europe. Nobody expected that this will happen, and therefore the Charter of the United Nations could not have possibly conceived of a tribal war inside Europe that the UN will prove incapable of handling.
Thank you, sir. There's another question here. This one is linked to a point that was raised a while ago, I think about 2 or 3 sessions ago. The question then was what we expect Rishi Sunak to do as Prime Minister, and whether or not he was going to be more favorable to people of Asian descent. And you shared your views during that session. You related to Obama and how Obama treated the Black race in the US. But now, sir, on the fringes of his first G20 summit, there's been some sort of trade deal with India. What is your view on that, sir, being the first sort of trade deal that he would be talking about there? And they reached an agreement on migration as well, sir.
Well, Rishi Sunak, to me, needs to listen more to advice from the experienced civil servants in Whitehall. Recall, he was advised against appointing the Home Secretary who had resigned because she broached security details and had resigned from Liz Truss government. He was advised against reappointing her. He ignored the advice, and he's been roasted by the Labour Party for that. Recall also that in fact, it lost a member of his cabinet who I understand was supposed to have bullied members of his previous cabinet, exchange of rather rude emails or that kind of thing. He claimed that he wasn't aware of that email, which again meant that before making the appointment, he didn't ask for vetting procedure to be gone through. So if I were him, knowing that he has Indian blood in him, even though I know that since Brexit, Britain has been trying to have a trade deal with India. So he didn't start it. But prudence would have dictated that that wouldn't be the first trade deal that he will sign, because ministers will be read into it. But he needs to be careful.
So let's talk about G20, sir. What are your takeaways from that? I know they released some statements at the end talking about focusing on economy, but I'll come back to the US-China conversation and the China-Canada situation, sir. But in general, what's your takeover of the G20 summit this year?
I think it was a successful summit. Kudos to the Indonesian Prime Minister or the President, who managed the conference and got at least a consensus, one on the Russian-Ukrainian war, even though it indicated that there were some countries who didn't agree with the views of the majority, so they didn't go by consensus. I think when the lines were drawn, they went by the overwhelming majority, which condemned Russia for its aggression against Ukraine. It is difficult at this time when all countries in the world are facing almost the same problems economically, galloping inflation, issues having to, even though the climate change conference was going on in Egypt at the same time. However, there's no way you are going to have a conference of the main polluters in the world and expect that they will come up with a resolution that will be strong on global climate, the damage that is being done to the global climate, and the need to still keep to this 1.5 degrees above which you shouldn't go. When the Russian-Ukrainian war has had deleterious effect on supply of gas, supply of crude, and all that kind of thing. People are going back to reopening carbon and coal factories that they had shut down in the hope that they will continue to have access to gas supplies, especially from the Soviet Union, which no longer become available. So I wasn't expecting the global, the G20 to go beyond waffling resolutions on climate change. Well, you said that we should wait for your questions on Biden, Janssen meeting and
yes, sir.
The meeting and Trudeau. So we'll wait.
Yes, sir. But there's a question here for you, sir. We talked about the strategic arms reduction treaty that Russia wanted to re-engage with. And in the statement at the time, they said Egypt was potentially a location for that. COP27 took place in Egypt. And what this person wants to know is the profile of Egypt rising because of all these? Why Egypt really is the question I think this person is trying to ask.
It was going to be either Egypt or Turkey. Turkish relationship with the United States is a tendentious one. And given the fact that practically all Western countries are anti-Russia because of the war, I think Egypt then becomes the nation closest to a neutral ground that will be acceptable to both parties.
Let's talk about US-China ties becoming better, according to reports coming out during the conference. And one of the concrete outcomes is that the US Secretary of State now plans to visit China next year. Do you see these two people ever having a really good relationship?
No, I don't. But first of all, let me say that the meeting between Biden and the Chinese president, the meeting was a positive one. That's been the first time the two will meet since Biden became president. And I was struck by the positive tones of both presidents. It was almost as if they exchanged notes. We are two powerful countries in the world. We cannot afford to subject the world to conflicts between the two of us, conflicts that may then go out of range. Therefore, we have a responsibility to act responsibly. That's the summary coming from both sides, the introductory remarks of both sides. And if you recall, 2 years ago, I had said on this program, when the young, inexperienced advisors of Biden came charging onto the world scene and saying, their foreign policy is going to be an alliance of democracies. The very first meeting between the Chinese foreign minister and the American Secretary of State, the American Secretary of State was attacking China on the issue of human rights. And the Chinese foreign minister said, look at you. How about the way you are treating your blacks and your, Native Americans in your own territory? And you dare sit there and accuse us of, and it was a very, very, as far as I'm concerned, immature approach on the side of the Americans. But they continued with this, their, alliance of democracies and so on, in spite of the fact that there was an element of hypocrisy. Some of their allies who are not, Democrats, in any case. And then I think now saying that it doesn't get them anywhere. They've now decided that there were issues like climate change, issues like North Korea, issues like even the Russian-Ukrainian war, on which the West needs the cooperation of China to moderate. There are other issues, I suppose, again, because of Republicans in Congress, the United States will continue to raise this issue of human rights amongst the Muslims in China. And surprisingly, the Chinese probably understand that because of the nature of American domestic politics, Biden has to raise this without meaning it. And then you have the issue of Taiwan, a no-go area for China. The United States waffled. It waffled because ask yourself, what does the term one China policy mean? It simply means that the United States recognizes that Taiwan belongs to China. That's what one China policy means. But the United States is hoping that China will not use force to integrate Taiwan into China as it has done with Hong Kong. It could only hope that China will not do that. And I really believe that the president of China has just won a 5-year term. He probably feels sorry for Biden, who's just lost control of House of Rep and has to face a presidential election in 2 years' time. He doesn't need to worry about any election or selection on, excuse me, until 5 years' time in China. So it's likely to probably be more relaxed in dealing with the United States, as long as you don't get the kind of recklessness on Taiwan that Nancy Pelosi showed last year. So, but all in all, I think it was a successful meeting between the two. It opened that window of opportunity for cooperation by saying that they will send, that he will allow his Secretary of State to go and visit Peking at some future date. But what they will talk about without irritating each other you will have to lessen the volume on Taiwan, lessen the volume on human rights amongst the Chinese Muslims, and concentrate on the kind of issues on which you can cooperate. Like, as I've said, climate change. I don't think you could hold the Chinese responsible for the behavior of North Korea. But on Taiwan, it's a no-go area. There cannot be any meeting of the minds on that.
So we cannot have an event like G20 without some drama taking place. And there's one particular one where the Chinese premier was talking to the Canadian counterpart and was talking about how they don't do it that way, referring to some leaked details about a meeting between the two. You always said diplomacy cannot be played in public. But what is your view on the damage that could have been done to the Canadian government by what has happened in terms of the information being leaked?
It's rather childish, I must say, of the Canadians. I mean, Trudeau has been there long enough now to know how this game is played. There are things you will talk about in those bilateral talks, especially when you are talking at the level of chief executives, prime minister on one hand, president on the other hand, that you don't want it to leak to the press because it will create domestic problems. And for the Canadian prime minister or a member of his party to have then gone to brief the Canadian press on all that took place behind closed doors is simply unacceptable in diplomacy. I think a lot of, several of members on our platform are experienced retired diplomats who will confirm that to you. I remember when I was a foreign minister, in fact, on two occasions. One was in India. Nigeria has seized an Indian plane, Indian Airways, because drugs were found in it. And we were then having a non-aligned conference in New Delhi. And when I was introduced to Prime Minister Gandhi, not the mother, but the son, and he simply turned to his foreign minister. He said, "You two go and solve this matter out." And I know what we said to each other at that meeting between the Indian foreign minister and myself, what kind of commitments that we made that allowed the Indian plane to be released. We didn't then go out and demarket each other by now briefing. The Nigerian press was there, the Indian press was there. None of us broke the understanding, because if we had broken that understanding, that plane would not have been released. There was another occasion, I can't remember which one that was now, again, where each one of us kept to the understanding that this is what we will tell our press, since they know we are meeting, and they will be interested in that. So it's during the time when the United States wanted to re-establish diplomatic relations with China. When Kissinger was there were several meetings that were held, and some of the meetings were even kept away from the knowledge of the press. And once the press got to know, the two sides agreed on what they would tell the press. So you cannot have diplomacy by leaking things to the press, to the embarrassment of the other side. It is not done. And I think that the president of China was quite right to have told Trudeau, this is not the way things are done. Trudeau's reply that where we have the free press is nonsense. Every country, well, not every country, but countries have free press. But diplomats know what diplomacy is all about. And you'll recall what I said about WikiLeaks at the time that issue came up. Without confidentiality, there can be no diplomacy. And without diplomacy, there cannot be conflict resolution.
Thank you so much for that, sir. I have taken you way over time. I apologize for that. But I'm going to say this last point, sir. I kept my promise. I watched Wakanda Forever.
I didn't. I haven't had an opportunity.
Well, some of the benefits of being on this side of the fence at this point in time.
No. They came to do what do you call a premiere in Lagos here, but I was too old to find my way to the.
Maybe we'll organize for a trip over here, and then we go and watch together, sir.
You are on. Please,
fantastic
please,
movie.
Before you round up, could I seize this opportunity to congratulate a regular member of our platform who has just got her PhD last week. She should have got it since January, but you know, the Nigerian universities were on strike. So she's been patient, it's taken that long, and I want to congratulate her. She's a young lady, and she just got her PhD in international relations.
Oh, fantastic. She actually sent a note to me as well to mention that. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, I almost forgot about that.
Yeah.
But someone has just said Wakanda is showing in Lagos.
Yeah, who is gonna take me there?
We should organize private screening for you, sir. I'm sure we can do private screening. Thank you very much for this evening, sir.
Thank you.
On that note, we close the program. Apologies for going over time. And to everybody, Wakanda forever. Good night, sir.
Good night.